time now for one more thing. Juan hits us off.
It's April. Time for high school, college seniors to open those make-or-break college acceptance letters. This year's big winner across the nation is a 17-year-old from Houston, Michael Brown. He got into Stanford, but that's just one of 20 schools that accepted the young man, and he got into all those schools and also got full scholarships to all of them. His mom, who's a drug counselor, says her dreams have come true.
That's awesome. Good for him. Jesse.
Yeah, Stanford was my safety school. So nice try.
Nice.
Maybe
so a guy in Sarasota, we're going to call him a Florida man, went out to his backyard to go for a swim around midnight, and guess what he found?
Oh, dear.
An 11-foot alligator swimming in his pool in Florida. He called some people. They took it out of the pool, and he was safe. But, I mean, look at that thing.
That's a big thing.
My gosh, look at how much fun it was having. It was like how I feel when I'm in the hot tub.
Greg, you're next.
All right, first, if you go to Berkeley, you got to start making shirts that say Stanford was my safety school. You have to do that.
Yeah,
all right.
I want to cut.
I hate these people. All right, if you're in a meeting, let's say it's an HR meeting or it's traffic school or it's records preservation training, and at the end of the meeting someone says, does anybody have any questions? Don't ask a question. Right. Nobody likes the person that asks a question, especially when it's nice outside or it's the end of the day. If you have a question, go on Google.
Yes.
Find out that question there. Answer that question.
That's a good answer. Everyone should listen to that. A good point. Everyone should listen to his advice. All right. People who know Jasper know he likes to look for fish. If you follow me on Instagram, he's always every day fishing and everywhere he can. This weekend, not only was it Easter yesterday, but Jasper caught a fish.
Whoa.
Check him out. Big one. Check him out.
Nice.
The other thing is, it was April Fool's, and I got so many people on that. He didn't catch a fish. Don't forget, let me tell you about Jasper. It comes out in paperback tomorrow. Kimberly.
Very, very, very cute. Okay, so a little bit of damp weather was no match for this year's 140th annual White House Easter egg roll. Nearly 30,000 adults and children joined the First Lady on the White House lawn. It was packed with fun. Melania Trump, Betsy DeVos, and Kellyanne Conway were among those featured as readers this year. And this goes back to 1878.
Always a great event. Special report is up next. Hey, Bret.
Thanks, Dana. Does Greg have any questions? No. All right. Shots fired in the looming trade war between the U.S. and China, sending Wall Street into another nosedive. President Trump rips Mexico for allowing, he says, an immigrant caravan to approach the southern border. We'll get a live response from the Mexican ambassador to the U.S. And one major American city confiscates a legally owned gun under the terms of a controversial new law. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. President Trump is calling out Mexico over, he says, its indifference to a caravan of Central American immigrants headed for the southern border. We'll get a live response from Mexico's ambassador to the U.S. in just a minute. The immigration news comes as President Trump lashes out against Democrats over DACA and issues a warning to China over a major tariff increase. That tariff news sent the Dow plummeting today. It was down more than 700 points at one stage, finished off 459. The S&P 500 fell 59. The Nasdaq dropped 193 today. It all happens on a day that was supposed to begin with some fun. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts starts us off tonight. Good evening, John.
Brett, good evening to you. Anyone familiar with the New Hampshire presidential primary process knows about the famous Politics and Eggs breakfast events. Well, today here at the White House, it was Politics and Eggs, Washington style. On the White House South Lawn today, President Trump presiding over the annual Easter egg roll and throwing eggs at Democrats for what he insists is a lack of action on DACA.
The Democrats have really let them down. They've really let them down. They had this great opportunity. The Democrats have really let them down. It's a shame. And now people are taking advantage of DACA, and that's a shame. It should have never happened.
White House officials say it was a briefing last week on a caravan of Central American migrants heading for the United States that got President Trump spun up on DACA, issuing a flurry of tweets in the past 2 days declaring DACA is dead. The tweets were meant as a warning to migrants and the organization helping them that there are no protections awaiting them in America. But President Trump also couldn't resist tweaking Democrats who rejected his offer of a DACA deal in exchange for a border wall and immigration reforms.
The president made multiple offers on DACA. He wanted to see something get done, and Democrats refused to actually put something on the table or work with the president to get anything done. They wanted to use DACA recipients as political pawns. I think what's happened here is incredibly sad.
Democrats dismissed the criticism, saying, wasn't it President Trump who started all this?
So what did the president do? He promised during his campaign two things. One, he would terminate DACA. He did that. He created this crisis. He created this problem all by himself. It wasn't something that needed to be done.
President Trump again called for immigration reform and new border security measures, linking immigration to NAFTA negotiations. In a tweet warning, Mexico is doing very little, if nothing, at stopping people from flowing into Mexico through their southern border and then into the United States. They must stop the big drug and people flows, or I will stop their cash cow, NAFTA. Mexico's current president didn't respond to the tweets, but former President Vicente Fox sure did, telling President Trump to stop the Twitter threats. NAFTA is a trademark for progress and success all over the world. And he accused the president of igniting, quote, the flame of hate and fear all across the nation. Also from the White House today, confirmation that in his congratulatory phone call to Russian President Vladimir Putin, President Trump suggested a White House meeting. In a statement, Sarah Sanders saying the two had discussed a bilateral meeting in the not-too-distant future at a number of potential venues, including the White House. Word of a potential White House meeting first emerged from the Kremlin, a government spokesman tweaking the U.S. action to expel some 60 Russian diplomats, saying in the wake of recent developments, it would be difficult to discuss a summit. And President Trump today continued to go after online giant Amazon, accusing Amazon of not paying its fair share in taxes and for taking advantage of the U.S. Postal Service to deliver its packages. Between that and the looming threat of a trade war with China, as you pointed out, Bret, it was a bad day on Wall Street with a heavy sell-off in the tech sector. Bret?
John Roberts live on the North Lawn. John, thank you. Let's get some additional information tonight on the group of immigrants headed toward the U.S. border in that big convoy that was referenced. National correspondent William Lajeunesse is monitoring developments from Los Angeles.
A week ago, a caravan of Central Americans crossed from Guatemala into Mexico, bound for the U.S.
After having crossed 2 checkpoints, we haven't performed another count, but I estimate that there are about 1,300.
Unlike most immigrants who hire smugglers, this group is guided by People Without Borders, a U.S. nonprofit advertising the trip and raising money online, while also saying it will provide legal advice on how immigrants can claim asylum upon reaching the U.S.
We'll take them into custody. We'll do hours worth of processing, and then we'll turn them over to ICE, and then ICE will release them based upon what they call a credible fear.
80% of the caravan is from Honduras. Most say they are fleeing violence and poverty. While that doesn't qualify as persecution on account of race, religion, nationality, social group, or political opinion, studies show 88% who claim asylum ultimately get their date in immigration court.
Let's make sure that if they do come to the U.S. border, that they are able to go through the full and fair process of seeking asylum if that's what they desire.
Because of backlogs in the courts, shelter space, and judicial rulings, immigrants can't be held indefinitely. That concerns President Trump, who blames ridiculous liberal Democrat laws like catch and release for the problem. Sunday, he asked Mexico to stop the caravan.
But Mexico has got to help us at the border. They flow right through Mexico. They send them into the United States. Can't happen that way anymore.
Now, Mexico did deport some 70,000 Central Americans last year, although historically they've been allowed to pass through, though it is against Mexican law. Now, the group is likely to reach the U.S. in the next 10 days unless the Trump administration can pressure Mexico to stop them first. Otherwise, I'm told they'll be processed like anyone else claiming asylum. Bret?
William, thank you. Let's get some official response now from the Mexican government to the news of this caravan and the criticism from President Trump and his administration. Geronimo Gutierrez is the Mexican ambassador to the U.S. Mr. Ambassador, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Bret.
Your thoughts on today, what the president has tweeted and what the administration is saying?
Well, thank you first for the chance to address this issue this evening. I think it's important. It has certainly raised attention here. 2 quick things. The first one is Mexico's migration policy is to seek that any migration is legal, safe, orderly, and respectful of basic human rights. And that's the way we act upon immigration. We certainly do not advocate for irregular immigration from our nationals or any other country. The second thing is that, in fact, our authorities, U.S. and Mexico cooperation, is very good on the matter. And I'll give you an example. Just last year, we convened a joint summit in Miami, authorities from the U.S. and Mexico, precisely to address this issue. We're working together, to foster development in Central American countries in order really to address the root causes of immigration, and also to do a better job in managing immigration in a way, again, that it's legal, safe, and orderly.
So specifically on this caravan, understanding that it does happen annually and it's used by some groups as a fundraising activity, really, are you going to do something different this year?
We are doing, first of all. Number one, the first thing is that you rightly mentioned this is not new. In a sense, it's largely intended to call attention on the rights of migrants in Mexico. Number two is our migration authorities are looking at, as appropriate, either to repatriate these people or to offer humanitarian relief to them in Mexico. And by the way, we have been in contact with the U.S. Embassy in Mexico since March 25, precisely to address it. And that's why I appreciate the opportunity to clarify these issues here this evening.
Mr. Ambassador, your country has pretty strict immigration laws. You, as William mentioned, deport tens of thousands of Hondurans and Salvadorans and Guatemalans every year.
We do. It is in the best interest of all nations, the Central Americans, ourselves, and the U.S., to assure that people don't migrate irregularly. It's actually very dangerous. And that is why, just for example, in 2016, Mexico repatriated, respecting the rights of people, repatriated around 153,000 Central Americans.
That's a lot of people.
In 2017, that number was around 100,000. And the figures so far for these years are around 40,000. So we do work to assure that migration is legal, safe, and orderly.
So in that sense, you understand where President Trump is coming from in this policy?
I think it's very important. We certainly understand the concern not only that President Trump has, but people in the United States here have about immigration. And I have to say that Mexico is now largely a country that receives immigrants. It's a source and a destiny of immigration. So we understand this very clearly. And what we're trying to do precisely is to work with the United States and Central Americans, first, again, to address the cause of immigration. Because if we don't do that, it's very difficult. And second, to achieve migration policies that allow us to better manage the phenomenon.
So what do you do along your southern border? And is the U.S. helping you?
We work, it is in our own interest to have a secure border in our southern border, and we're also in favor of having a secure border with the United States. But actually, Bret, if we do have legal avenues for people to migrate, we do a better job, and we can devote more resources to the actual security threats. We work closely with U.S. on different mechanisms regarding immigration in our shared border and also in our southern border.
Has the drug problem increased or decreased in recent weeks?
Just last year, Bret, we had two very important high-level strategic dialogues with the United States in order to address drug trafficking. And the way we're dealing with this is that we really need to see it as a market issue. There is certainly a supply element to this, there's a demand element to this, and what we agreed with the United States authorities is that we must really disrupt the business operations of transnational organized crime. If we only go against the head of cartels, that we do, and quite successfully, the problem is that the market remains. And we're not really able to solve clearly the issue. So we need to disrupt their business models. We're working very closely with security agencies here in the United States precisely for that purpose.
So you know that the president, this administration, has linked helping with the border and the immigration issue directly with negotiations on NAFTA. The last tweet the president had today, Mexico is making a fortune on NAFTA. They have very strong border laws. Ours are pathetic with all the money they make from the U.S. Hopefully they will stop people from coming through their country into ours, at least until Congress changes our immigration laws. What do you think about that linkage?
First of all, it is in our own best interest, and that's the way we see it, to assure that migration is safe, legally, and ordered. The same happens. We work on cooperation on security matters with the United States because it's also on our best interest, and we will continue to do so. Now, on trade, what is very important is NAFTA, in our view, has been largely a successful agreement for the three countries. It is 25 years old. It needs updating and modernizing, and that's why we're focusing with the U.S. and our Canadian friends in finding a solution that is win-win-win for the three countries.
Are you optimistic that that's going to come to a conclusion?
Quite clearly, there are some difficult issues to tackle. We're not there yet. I think we're in a better shape today than we were a year ago. I think that the negotiating teams are gaining ground. There are important issues that we haven't solved, but I think there's a strong commitment on the part of the three partners to try to solve this. There's too much at stake for Mexico, certainly, but also for Canada and for the United States. And quite clearly, a lot of employment on the three countries depends on a successful NAFTA renegotiation. It's not so much, Bret, about how much we trade among ourselves, although that's important, but how are we, in fact, producing together to export to other regions of the world.
Mr. Ambassador, we appreciate your time. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here this evening.
Thank you. We told you earlier Wall Street took a hit today. The news of the tariffs from China took it pretty hard. The president's press spokesman says President Trump will fight back. It is the latest salvo in the growing trade dispute, which some feel could lead to an all-out trade war among the world's two largest economies. Correspondent Rich Edson has the latest tonight from the State Department.
China, the world's largest pork consumer. Last year, American pig farmers sold nearly $700 million of their pork to China. China just announced that same meat will be 25% more expensive.
We export more than 26% of all U.S. pork production outside of our borders. So any disruption to an important market like China is bad news for U.S. hog farmers.
China's Ministry of Commerce says it is imposing tariffs on 128 American products sold in China, pushing up the price of those goods and presenting a substantial disadvantage to American manufacturers and farmers. China announced a 15% tariff on U.S. fruit, wine, steel pipes, and other products, 120 in total, and a 25% import fee on 8 others, like pork and recycled aluminum. This is in response to Trump administration tariffs on aluminum and steel imports from China and other countries. The White House justifies those tariffs, claiming they'll address the annual $350 billion U.S. trade deficit with China.
He's tired of us being taken advantage of. They've taken our intellectual property, and the president's going to fight back, and he's going to push back. But we want to be able to work with them to make sure that we're getting a good deal and that we're not taking advantage of it.
China says its tariffs hit about $3 billion worth of American imports, a small percentage of the more than $130 billion in goods the United States sends to China. Though analysts and free trade advocates say they worry about the next step. President Trump has also threatened to tax $60 billion in Chinese imports in response to China's theft of American trade secrets. The U.S. government says that costs U.S. businesses between $225 and $600 billion a year. Discussions continue between the governments. American producers say they want the U.S. and China to resolve this soon.
There are 550,000 jobs in rural America that are tied directly to the U.S. pork industry. 110,000 of those jobs are directly tied to exports. So important for the growth of our industry and for our economy.
There are also national security concerns. China is key to upcoming talks with North Korea. And the White House has just announced that President Trump will soon meet with the leader of a top competitor in the region for China, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. They'll discuss North Korea's strategy. Bret?
Rich Edson, live at the State Department. Rich, thanks. More on this with the panel. Up next, the spin war between a group of local TV stations criticizing fake news and critics decrying right-wing politics. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 11 in Los Angeles, where search teams found a 13-year-old boy who fell into a drainage pipe at a park while spending Easter with his family. Jesse Hernandez and his cousins were jumping on wooden planks in an abandoned maintenance building in Griffith Park. One of those planks broke and the teen plunged 25 feet into a 4-foot-wide drainage pipe. The boy was found alive and talking about 12 hours later. Fox 4 in Dallas has a 20-year-old Texas man who, as a teenager, invoked affluenza in his defense after killing 4 people in a drunken wreck, is released from jail. Ethan Couch was freed today after serving nearly 2 years for a revoked probation. Couch was 16 in June 2013 when he struck and killed 4 pedestrians. At trial, a psychologist blamed Couch's irresponsibility on family wealth, dubbing it affluenza. And this is a live look at New York from our affiliate, Fox 5. One of the big stories there tonight, supposed to be springtime, but the Yankees home opener postponed today because of snow. The crosstown Mets also called off their game. The snow was part of a fast-moving weather system that swept through parts of the Northeast. We had a live shot, but that's tonight's look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. Connecticut Democrat Congresswoman Elizabeth Esty says she will not seek re-election this fall. Esty has been fighting off calls for her resignation over her handling of a sexual harassment case involving her former chief of staff. Esty says in announcing her decision, she, quote, should have done better. She has again apologized to a female former member of her staff who said she was punched in the back and received death threats from that chief of staff in 2016. An ethics official at the Environmental Protection Agency says EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt's lease of a Capitol Hill condo tied to a prominent fossil fuels lobbyist did not violate federal rules. Pruitt was charged only $50 a night and only for nights he stayed in the unit. That is said to be about half the going rate. The Canadian company that owns some of the most famous department stores in America says it has been hit by hackers. Hudson's Bay, which owns Saks Fifth Avenue, Saks All Fifth, and Lord & Taylor, says its store payment systems have been compromised. The hackers are apparently putting up for sale stolen information from up to 5 million credit and debit cards. Hudson's is not saying how many stores or customers have been affected. President Trump is blasting what he calls fake news networks over their criticism of a group of local TV stations who are promising to report accurately. The stations are owned by the Sinclair Group, and anchors in many different cities have been reading what appears to be copy written by the Home Office.
The sharing of biased and false news
has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish true without checking facts first. Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think, and this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Interesting to hear it like that. Senior political analyst Bret Hume is here with some thoughts on all of this. Bret, good evening. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, Bret, I must say it is kind of hilarious to hear that chorus of voices all, mouthing the same words. But if you read the words themselves, they sound like a basic mission statement from a news organization determined to reassure its viewers that it is in the fair, balanced, and factual business and is not going to be involved in any of the kind of factually sloppy stuff that turns up on social media and elsewhere on the internet. It also urges viewers who are concerned about any of their stations' coverage to get in touch with them, and says they'll be taken seriously. I must say, if you read the words themselves, I find nothing to object to about them.
Well, as you can imagine, some people had a real problem with it. Some on Twitter called it George Orwell. Here was John Meacham on one channel this morning.
It's state media, essentially. I guess only Donald Trump could do this, could unify fears of the corporate media plus First Amendment people plus true conservatives who should be worried about large institutions dictating the reality for others.
Heard that a lot, Bret.
Wow, John Meacham's a friend of mine, and I've admired his work for many years, but I don't know what in the world he's talking about. First of all, I know a lot of people in social media have interpreted this mission statement by these stations, read by anchors across the country, as being pro-Trump, but Trump is never mentioned. And the fact that Trump, like this group of stations, thinks that there's a lot of bad stuff seeping into the media doesn't make it wrong simply because Trump agrees with it, and is now, I guess, defending the stations. I got to say, there's a certain paranoia in this country about much of what is said, because everybody seems to link everything to Donald Trump, whether it is really about Donald Trump or not. And of course, Donald Trump participates in this because he thinks everything's about him.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
you put them together and you've got kind of a toxic brew here.
To that point, he tweeted out, so funny to watch fake news networks among the most dishonest groups of people I've ever dealt with criticize Sinclair Broadcasting for being biased. Sinclair is far superior to CNN and even more fake NBC, which is a total joke. I mean, Bret, it's not like we don't know what the president is thinking. He kind of lets us in on it every day.
Well, that's true. And the other thing is, look, if people who like Donald Trump and people who don't like Donald Trump watch Sinclair News, and Sinclair News sticks to the points that are elaborated in that message that was read across the country, I think they'll both be satisfied. They're simply calling for unbiased, fact-based news coverage, and I don't see what in the world all the fuss could really be about.
Bret, as always, thank you.
Thank you, Bret.
Up next, teachers not teaching but marching for better pay and benefits. Keep it here. Easter weekend is a little longer than anticipated for many public school students in Kentucky and Oklahoma. Teachers are there refusing to work and marching instead on their respective state capitals in an effort to try to get what they want. Senior correspondent Mike Tobin shows us tonight.
Public schools in Kentucky were closed Monday as thousands of teachers descended on the state capitol in Frankfort. Their anger motivated by a pension reform bill for which Republican Governor Matt Bevin told teachers they should be grateful. But it was tacked onto a sewage bill and, according to teachers, passed deceptively without input.
People are angry about the backhandedness, backdoor deals, the corruption in Frankfort.
On Monday, teachers said they wanted to pressure lawmakers to be certain the state budget served the best interest of public schools.
Our students are the future, and they need to fund our future.
In Oklahoma, teachers demonstrated despite already receiving an agreement for a $6,100 pay raise. They had asked for $10,000. They claim the Sooner State ranks 49th for teacher pay and school funding.
Some folks say, you got that pay raise. What more do you want? Well, I'm going to tell you what more we want. We want a good school that every student deserves. That's what we want.
Teachers there have emphasized their demonstration is less about their pay, more about upgrading outdated teaching tools.
This is from 2006, and still to this day, I'm learning from it.
Both demonstrations inspired by West Virginia teachers who last month walked out for 9 days and received a 5% pay increase.
A lot of schools are on spring break, but teachers are supposed to return to normal schedules on Tuesday. However, union representatives say they will continue to walk off the job if lawmakers don't start negotiating. And the Arizona Education Association says teachers in the Grand Canyon state are planning demonstrations, but not necessarily walking off the job. Bret, back to you.
We'll watch it. Mike, thanks. Overseas now, France's national train company is warning a workers' strike will disrupt train service within France and elsewhere in Europe Tuesday and Wednesday. 4 labor unions have called on rail workers to strike for 2 days every week until the end of June. The rail company says only 15% of high-speed trains and 25% of regional trains will be running Tuesday and Wednesday due to that strike. Continuing overseas, Israel is dismissing allegations that it used excessive force last week against Palestinian demonstrators engaged in a mass protest on the Gaza border. Correspondent Connor Powell is watching the situation from Jerusalem tonight.
The death toll from Friday's violent protests along the Israeli-Gazan border continue to rise, with at least 18 Palestinians now dead and more than 750 injured. Many of them appear to have been unarmed demonstrators.
I was just standing there when I felt something hit my leg. It pushed me to the ground.
Amateur video released today appears to show several incidents of Palestinians being shot while posing no apparent threat to soldiers. However, Israeli officials rejected claims soldiers targeted unarmed protesters, saying the videos are, quote, completely fabricated. Instead, Israeli commanders claim Hamas militants tried to infiltrate the border fence, and they only used force to prevent a breach. Over the weekend, the U.S. State Department called on all those involved to take steps to lower tensions. However, European leaders criticized Israel's reaction to the protests, while the United Nations called for an independent investigation. Palestinian leaders in Gaza plan on holding regular demonstrations at the border fence while Israel celebrates its 70th anniversary of its founding. Fears of a new round of violence here are growing. Bret?
Connor Powell in Jerusalem. Connor, thank you. Senior Pentagon officials tell Fox the U.S. Special Operations soldier killed by a roadside bomb in Syria Friday was on a kill or capture mission against a known ISIS member. Master Sergeant Jonathan Dunbar of Austin, Texas, was killed along with a British Special Forces soldier. 5 others were wounded in that operation. We reported last week President Trump says U.S. troops will be leaving Syria very soon. March Madness ends tonight, but there are increasing numbers of people in the U.S. who say not paying the players is its own form of madness. What about that? We'll have that story next. Villanova takes on Michigan tonight in the men's championship game of the NCAA basketball tournament. Notre Dame won the women's side of the tournament. March Madness is one of the most popular events in American sports, but critics of the NCAA say while the schools run by adults make billions of dollars, the kids who actually play don't get a cent in real money. Correspondent Kevin Cork looks at that controversy tonight.
From the hardwood to the college gridiron, great finishes in the NCAA are commonplace. But great finishes for the athletes after the whistle stops are increasingly rare. Mitch Daniels is the former governor of the state of Indiana and president at Purdue University.
We've seen the game, in essence, semi-professionalized, although the young men who are creating all the value don't get paid for it. Something really needs to change.
Daniels is talking about the NCAA's labor force, which are the athletes themselves, lured by the promise of a possible education while the NCAA generates billions. An imbalance that's garnered the attention of the Congressional Black Caucus, which has announced a task force to assess the treatment of student athletes, including the extent to which they are able to get a college education, including the revenue that's generated by the student athletes themselves.
We treat them as employees without giving them the rights that employees have.
David Ridpath is a best-selling author on the subject of sports and education.
We have to make a choice. Are they students or are they employees? And they can't be both.
Unlike employees, student athletes can't collectively bargain and don't earn a salary.
I know it sounds good on paper, a $200,000 education in return for playing a sport that most people would play for free. I get that, but the devil's in the details.
Today, we announced charges of fraud and corruption in the world of college basketball.
Details that have attracted the attention of the FBI, which is investigating claims of bribery, impermissible gifts, and even loans from sports agents to players and their families. Bret, member schools tell the IRS they're not-for-profit organizations that emphasize academic excellence. But experts tell us that means unless Congress does something to change the system, the NCAA will keep making big bucks on the backs of its players. Bret?
All right, Kevin, thank you. What do you think? Do you think college athletes should be paid? Let me know on Twitter at Bret Baier. You can use the hashtag Special Report, or on Facebook at facebook.com/BretBaierSR. The National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, is not happy about Tesla's decision to release information about a fatal crash investigation involving its autopilot system. A vehicle using semi-autonomous system crashed into a concrete lane divider in California last week, killing the driver. Tesla says data shows the driver did not have his hands on the wheel as recommended and received several warnings from the system prior to the crash. Police in Seattle are going after people's guns. It sounds like the worst nightmare of the NRA and Second Amendment supporters, but proponents of the move say it's long overdue. Correspondent Dan Springer looks at both sides tonight.
I'm grateful that the police got the gun away from me.
This Army veteran who is being treated for PTSD recently had his gun confiscated by the Seattle police. It's one of 27 guns seized from 16 people by SPD since last July, legally under Washington State's new extreme risk protection order law. Even though Alexander McKenzie had committed no crime, he realizes due to his mental state, being armed was too risky. Washington is one of 6 states with ERPOs, also known as red flag laws. But in the wake of the Parkland school shooting, the Brady campaign says at least 30 states are considering them.
I think we're seeing some building consensus in, blue states and red states that this is a good way to balance public safety against people's Second Amendment rights.
Guns are removed for 1 year, but there is due process. Only family, roommates, or police can petition the court for the civil order. A judge has to determine the person is a danger to himself or others, and the gun owner gets a chance to make his or her case. Even gun rights advocates who are afraid of government abuse say it appears to be working.
We've seen the downside to people who are distraught or crazy, taking out their problems on the general public. We don't want that to happen.
One petition to seize guns was turned down by a judge. All others have been granted, including the taking of this AR-15 rifle. According to the pastors of this Seattle church, a former member threatened to kill them and wished the recent Texas church massacre had happened there.
I have no doubt that it is a kind of tool that we can use to prevent greater tragedies.
Taking someone's guns is always potentially volatile, so Seattle cops bend over backwards to avoid being heavy-handed. 9 months in, both sides say the law is being used sparingly and no one has alleged a violation of his rights, making it more likely other states will follow. Bret?
Dan Springer in Seattle. Dan, thanks. Next up, President Trump rips Mexico for an immigrant caravan and Democrats for DACA and China for new tariffs. We'll get reaction to all of that from the panel when we return.
Mexico has got to help us at the border. If they're not going to help us at the border, it's a very sad thing between two countries. Mexico has got to help us at the border. And a lot of people are coming in because they want to take advantage of DACA.
We certainly understand the concern not only that President Trump has, but people in the United States here have about immigration. What we're trying to do precisely is to work with the United States and Central Americans.
Mexican ambassador on the show earlier, the president, the administration talking about concerns along the border. This, as the Washington Post is just moving a story, citing multiple sources, saying the Trump administration is working to speed up deportations and impose quotas on immigration judges. In other words, to get the guidelines for a new quota system to ensure that the cases are completed in a timely, efficient, and effective manner. The concern being about this caravan of immigrants coming across or to the border in coming days, we believe. Let's bring in our panel. Matt Schlapp, contributor with The Hill. A.B. Stoddard, associate editor at Real Clear Politics and host of No Labels Radio on SiriusXM, and Guy Benson, political editor at townhall.com. All right, Matt, we should clarify that the president said they were going to come across to take advantage of DACA. You can't do that.
Well, you can, in the sense that people confuse all these terms. You have DACA, which is for a certain period of time, but then you have this group of people that folks call dreamers. And this is what a lot of people don't realize. Every day, every week on that border, there are unaccompanied minors, the minors who actually are accompanied, who by our own law, we have to accept into the country. So the idea that there are illegal people coming to this country very regularly under our laws is one of these loopholes that President Trump wants to stop. He wants to stop this catch and release, this insane problem that leads us to this whole question of amnesty 10, 20 years later.
You know, I've asked the Mexican ambassador about the Mexico laws, which are very strict on immigration. They deport tens of thousands.
Repatriate, Bret.
Repatriate, he said, in numerous different ways today. But, you know, it's the same issue, different country.
Right. I think that in your interview, you know, what was clear and what is more important than President Trump getting a lot of backlash from conservatives after signing a spending bill that everyone's upset about, just trying to really galvanize people about a caravan and what he calls democratic laws that are weak on immigration and Democrats not wanting borders and everything. The most important thing here is that is him using Mexico as a cudgel and NAFTA and the negotiations that are very sensitive and ongoing for a year. Republicans are very concerned about what the state of these negotiations are. And when he uses his sort of political bullying on Twitter over immigration and this caravan arriving and the Mexicans having a cash cow, which is NAFTA, and I'll punish them this way to get what I want out of them on immigration at the border, using NAFTA, that is the place where this becomes incredibly serious. He and DHS and if there's a legislative fix can do what they can go ahead and try to mitigate this problem at the border. That's separate from the very sensitive negotiations with Mexico over NAFTA right now.
If you look at his negotiating style, some would say that Kim Jong-un is at the table because he was aggressive like this. AB's right. It's very sensitive. They're very the negotiations are pretty detailed and complex on NAFTA, but supporters would say, why not?
I think the argument from Trump supporters would be vis-a-vis Kim Jong-un being at the negotiating table at all and being willing to meet with the president is the unpredictability of the president and his administration, where I think for the first time in a long time in Pyongyang, there are people wondering, are the Americans going to stick to the international script that we've become very accustomed to, or is he going to go rogue and do whatever he wants?
But does that work with Mexico, I guess is my question.
And I think that is a legitimate question to ask, because I think the Mexican government, you were sitting next to their ambassador moments ago, they're probably sitting in Mexico City wondering, okay, if the president is willing to blow up these negotiations over NAFTA because of border security issues in this caravan, maybe we can throw some bones to the Americans on internal enforcement to show that we're doing our part on our northern border, and then maybe get them off our back, because that should be a separate issue. Making it convoluted and all this cross-pollination is very difficult, frankly, for some of us to keep track of sometimes. I don't even know if it's strategic specifically, but the general unpredictability may sometimes lead to positive outcomes.
The president says and tweets a lot of things, but behind the scenes, you had the Secretary of Homeland Security traveling to Mexico a couple of weeks ago, meeting with officials, dealing with security on their southern border. So things are happening outside the sound and fury, perhaps.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, this is working. The idea that the president goes out, mostly on Twitter, but in other venues as well, makes it very clear over and over again what he expects from the American government's point of view. And there's no question that it brings people to the table. There's no question that DHS is working with their counterparts in the Mexican government. And I think it's really important what everyone has said on this panel. They repatriated over 250,000 people in Mexico. Mexico would not accept a child at the border. Their laws don't say they have to accept them like we have to accept them. We should have laws that are sane and that bring us security at the border, just like all these other countries we're dealing with. It actually makes a lot of sense.
Senator Dianne Feinstein, AB, tweeting, President Trump is absolutely wrong on DACA. He unilaterally rescinded DACA for no reason and has rejected every single bipartisan proposal that would protect dreamers from deportation. Simply false to say that Democrats walked away from the table. Where is the ground truth on this?
Well, the truth is that there have been bipartisan proposals on DACA, and that obviously is something that really should be solved in a bipartisan way. But the truth is that when the president offered his own plan, which it was a four-pronged approach,
chain migration, other elements of it,
many in his party thought 1.8. They called it amnesty, legalization for 1.8 million, beyond the pool of what Matt was referring to as the precise DACA population, was a non-starter with conservative Republicans. So it's really unfair for him to say that the Democrats killed it and the Democrats don't want borders and everything. Yeah, the Democrats want a sweeter DACA deal that doesn't involve a lot of border wall money. They would like to, give some stuff for existing fixes to existing fences. They have not come far on exchanging a border wall for a DACA fix.
So you don't think a $25 billion allotment or down the road tied to DACA would pass?
I actually think that it would. It would be a bipartisan bill. It would have to be a majority. You get around these rules of whether or not. I think it would. It would depend. It would depend, exactly what the terms were. Yeah, they don't want the chain migration and the diversity lottery packaged in with that. But it is a problem on the Republican side as well as on the Democratic side. And he said many times to Democrats, including Dianne Feinstein, that he wanted to fix this problem, and now he's walking away. Therefore, her tweet.
So, this is one day. We also have, we didn't talk about it, the China pushback on tariffs. These are big, big things that would be page one, lead of shows, but there's so much.
Yeah. Drinking from a fire hose.
This is another day.
All day, every day. And yes, we are seeing, and this is relatively modest at the moment, but a retaliation from the Chinese, another escalation on the path to what some of us worry would be a trade war. And the U.S. taking shots in that trade war invites retaliation. That's something that does not benefit anyone, and people who believe in free trade think that when you escalate, the other side responds, and consumers in both countries and the economies in both countries lose. And these are the simple rules of economics, and we're seeing them coming to roost in a small way, and the concern is, will it develop? Will it get worse?
We will see how it plays. Panel, thank you. Squeezing it in with a guest with the Mexican ambassador. When we come back, a different kind of hazard for golfers in Australia.